Today we're going to discuss three important aspects related to perception. They are information comparison, information recognition, and selective attention. Concept of information comparison, which means that a person has two items that are both present in the environment for a long enough period of time to detect that there is a difference between these two intensities, or that there is similarity between the two intensities. The just noticeable difference represents the least amount of difference that's necessary for an individual to actually detect that there's a difference there, if in fact a difference exists between the two intensities. Information recognition means that you're comparing one item in the environment to another item that's stored in memory. We call this an absolute judgment paradigm. It's the same as information recognition, and it indicates the extent to which a participant is capable of matching a stimulus in the environment to one that's already stored in memory. So I want you to think back to our lab experiment when we did use the Weber constants. When you had both constants, one in each hand, you were involved in an information comparison task. When you were given one of the constants and then you were given a trial weight after the constant was taken away, that was an information recognition task. Note that this is similar to a multiple choice type of question. In multiple choice, you are studying and you can put information into your memory. And then what happens is you go to the test and the information is actually in the environment, and you have to now recognize, does that information match what you already have stored in memory? So here you see an old apparatus. It's called linear positioning. And on this device, what you see is a linear positioning apparatus. Linear because the ruler is linear. There are also apparatus that measure memory in a curvilinear fashion. Well, on this linear positioning apparatus, you'll notice the start right here. That could actually be detached and moved to anywhere on the device or apparatus. This is the stop right here. Same thing. It could be taken out and moved to anywhere on the device. And then you have the linear slide. And that could be moved to anywhere on this pole here. And it's on ball bearings, so you should not be receiving any kind of feedback from the pole to the slide. You'll notice here that this is an electronic measure of the error. And what is the error? Well, the experimenter moves the subject, the slide, from the start out to the stop. And then the stop is removed. And what happens is the subject is moved back to the start. And then the subject is asked to recall the position. Well, let's say that the position is 2 centimeters or 2 inches short of the target. That would be the measure of error that's given on a linear positioning apparatus. Well, this idea about recognition actually connects to the very first theory that we're going to talk about in motor learning, which is called a closed-loop theory of motor learning. It was written by a man named Jack Adams. In 1971, it was published. And basically what you see here is that there is a standard. I want you to notice that the standard in Adams' theory is called the memory trace. Once you have a standard, that would basically be your motor plan. What do you intend to do? You send it out to what Adams called the movement organizer. That's where the motor program is organized. That represents the neuromuscular commands that are going to be sent from the brain to the musculature. And then based upon that arrangement, movement takes place. And whenever we move, we get feedback back into the system. Proprioception is actually stimuli that comes back into the system. Adams refers to that information as the error detector. So if you can imagine this error detector, which he calls the perceptual trace, is compared to what we intend to do. In other words, what we did is compared to what we intend to do. If there's a match, then everything goes on as planned. If there's a mismatch, then I know that I have to reprogram the whole idea and send it back through the musculature. So imagine if I were running through the park and everything's going just fine. No problem. I'm getting really good feedback. Everything's just fine. The comparison of the memory trace to the perceptual trace is actually just fine. But all of a sudden, I step on a root. My system is able to recognize that there is a difference between the standard and the feedback that I'm receiving, the error detection. And so I have to reprogram. Now, sometimes people fall when they step on the root. The reason for that is there's not enough time to get the feedback in order to adjust the standard, send that information out from the brain to the musculature, and reproduce a movement. The perceptual process is a limited process, and so is short-term memory, a limited process. We say it's limited in terms of how much space it has, and the limit is approximately 7 plus or minus 2 items. What does that mean? It means about 5 to 7 items that we could process it. At any given minute. At any given minute. The time limitation in minute. The time limitation is approximately 20 to 60 seconds. About 20 seconds for the limit of verbal information. Motor information tends to hang around a little bit longer, approximately 60 seconds or so. Unless I can't continue to recycle this information, it's going to dissipate. So in order to deal with these limitations, we have to selectively attend to information. What selective attention means is that we pick out that information that's relevant or important to us. What aspects of the environment stand out for us? In fact, we pay attention to those things that seem to catch our attention. Selective attention is also impacted by where our sensory instruments are focused. In other words, where we are orienting our eyes or our ears could affect whether or not we selectively attend to information, because we just might not take it in. Selective attention is a very important factor, because without selective attention, we could become overwhelmed by all of the information that impacts us all the time in our environment. It's our ability to filter out information that helps us to stay sane. People that have hyperactivity disorders may not be as good at picking out the relevant factors, may be distracted by irrelevant factors, but this limitation still exists. So if I'm paying attention to irrelevant factors, then I don't have enough space for possibly what might be relevant. So finally, I want to talk about some of the explanations that there are for selective attention. One is what's called the cocktail party phenomenon. In other words, if you're at a cocktail party and you're in the living room having a conversation with someone, and all of a sudden in the kitchen somebody says your name, and you know that that person's talking about you. It's called the cocktail party phenomenon because even though you're looking at the person who thinks you're listening to him or her, your ear is actually orienting around the corner so that you could pick up information in the kitchen or selectively attend to the information in the kitchen and hear that conversation. So you really can't listen to both conversations simultaneously. If you think you can, what you're doing is you're sampling from each conversation, and that's giving you enough information to basically stay with the conversation. Meaningfulness, or how meaningful something is, also contributes to selective attention, and pertinence means the same as meaningfulness. How pertinent is something? In our next presentation, we'll talk about the bottleneck in the system, and I'll talk about the gate in Welford's model. So I'm going to hold off on those for just another day. And then finally, our last slide is some ideas that Kahneman had on selective attention. Two ideas. One has to do with enduring dispositions, which basically are rules of involuntary attention. In other words, certain things attract our attention even though we didn't have any intention of paying attention to that. We have a set of expectations for the way things are going to be, and those things attract our attention, essentially. But when something is out of the ordinary, then that's actually going to be affect my enduring dispositions. The momentary intentions are that we could actually instruct individuals about where to pay attention. So we could be explicit about where we want to focus individuals, particularly for teachers, for rehabilitation therapists. Think about where you want your clients' focus to be. For fitness trainers, think about what you want your clients to be thinking about when you're working with them. That would be a momentary intention. So what I want you to do is go out to Canvas. You'll find a discussion tab. And for one point, I want you to tell me something or explain what happened with regard to enduring dispositions and momentary intentions at the Baltimore Orioles game in 2015. Enjoy.